Hello, and welcome to the webinar, How to Create a Safety First Culture. In this webinar, you will learn how to make safety a core part of your company culture in order to prevent serious injuries and fatalities. My name is Lisa, and I am a member of Team Urbint, our webinar sponsor. Urbint uses artificial intelligence to anticipate threats to critical infrastructure and the workers who maintain it, so you can prevent incidents before they happen. Urbint's newest solution is Urbint Lens for Worker Safety. It provides insight into the riskiest scheduled construction activities, enabling you to take the right action on the right site at the right time to protect your workforce. You can learn about Urbint Lens for Worker Safety and Urbint by visiting urbint.com. Urbint is pleased to have renowned utility safety expert Nick Stavropoulos as our speaker today. Nick has 40 years of experience working in the utility industry. He is the former president and chief operating officer of Pacific Gas and Electric and the former chief operating officer of National Grid US. These days, Nick regularly consults on worker safety matters and shares his expertise in presentations just like this one. Now I'll turn the mic over to Nick in just one moment, but before I do, let's look at our agenda. In this webinar, Nick will define a safety first culture and then discuss why safety should be your highest cultural priority. The bulk of the presentation will be spent covering agenda item 3, steps to create a safety first culture. Nick will wrap up the webinar with a question and answer session. I will monitor the Q&A feature throughout the webinar, so you can ask questions at any time. And Nick will answer as many questions as time allows. Please note that we will be asking a few poll questions throughout the webinar. To participate in the polls, simply select your answer when prompted, and we'll give everyone about 20 seconds to submit their answers. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a recording of it, so don't worry if you need to jump off at any point. Now, without any further ado, please welcome Nick Stavropoulos.
Lisa, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. This is obviously a subject that's near and dear to my heart. How do you make safety first culture the leading cultural element within your organization? Obviously, you all believe in safety first. That's why you've invested your time here with us today. In almost every high hazard industry company that I deal with, virtually everyone, I would say everyone, talks about safety and safety culture being the most important thing that they do. But it's one thing to say, and it's another thing to actually make safety the core value within your organization. Now, I've been at this for, as Lisa said, over 40 years. And along the way, I've seen a lot. I've done some good things. My teams have done some great things, but I've made plenty of mistakes along the way too. And I think the easiest way to learn is to learn from the mistakes of others. And so what I want to do today is share with you some of those things that I have found that really distinguish safety first companies that don't just talk about it, but actually do it and implement it and become part of their top-down culture within their organization. So I'm going to share with you some material, but I think the richest part of today's gathering is going to be during the Q&A, when we can hear from you and we can have a bit of a dialogue. We're also going to have some, as Lisa mentioned, some polling in the middle here to see kind of what you are currently feeling and experiencing within your organizations. So let me begin. What are the elements of a safety first culture? Well, it begins at the top. Within any organization, it really starts with the highest levels. It starts in public companies. It starts with the boards of directors. It's the chairperson of the organization. It's the CEO, the CFO, the entire C-suite. At the end of the day, they're the ones that set the tone. They're the ones that allocate the resources. They're the ones that set expectations of where everyone in the organization is going to invest their time. And it's not something that can be delegated. I have since I retired a little over 2 years ago, I've had the opportunity to visit with lots of C-suites across the country and abroad as well. And every single CEO or COO tells me safety is their top priority. But when you probe and you find out, well, how much time do you personally invest to ensure the safe operation of your organization, the safety of your people and your customers? Sometimes you find out that while safety is the top priority, it's not where they spend most of their time. It's not where they spend most of their time by a long shot. And so I turn the tables around and say, well, how can safety be your top priority if you're not investing a significant amount of time in ensuring that the organization is operating as safe as it possibly can? It needs to be inclusive. It needs to start at the top, but everyone in the organization needs to be involved in the safe operation. And as we will discuss in a little bit, it's really the people that are doing the work, the hands on the work. You need to have the insight of those folks. You need to be proactive. You need to ensure that you're seeking out all possible sources of information around how your organization is working and what it can do better. It's a critical component. Things just don't happen without work and without effort around proactively identifying what's possible. I think in order for employees to be encouraged to speak up, to identify problems, the best way to do that is to ensure that you have a non-punitive self-reporting element within your company in an important part of your culture. If people feel if they identify a problem or self-identify an issue where they messed up, they made a mistake, those are the folks that you want to actively cultivate, but it's not going to happen unless you have a non-punitive self-reporting culture. And this is really part and parcel of the airline industry, the nuclear industry, the chemical industry, and it's starting to propagate the electric and gas utility industry here across the country. It's being recognized that's important. So we need to move away from suspensions, terminations, or letters to the file, unless we have the most egregious situations where people just aren't following procedure or repeatedly continue to not follow procedure and not follow all safety protocols. You need to be transparent. You need to make sure that everyone in the organization that wants to know what the company is doing regarding safety, and it needs to be disseminated as widely as possible. Information about incidents internal to the company, even at other companies where there could be a parallel within your own organizations, are vital sources of information to share. So you want everyone to feel that we're not playing hide and seek, that we're being open and honest and transparent about what's going on within the company. You need to hold yourselves accountable. And so you need to find ways to measure. Unfortunately, most organizations use lagging indicators. And while they can be useful, sometimes they mask real problems. The absence of an incident is not an indication that an organization is safe. Let me say that again. The absence of incidents does not mean that an organization is safe. And when I'm talking safe here, all injuries are worrisome. What we're really talking about here are injuries that could severely injure people or kill them, right? And that's the most important thing where we need to invest almost all of our resources on. And so leading indicators are essential to help you as leaders of organizations determine, am I really running the safest operation that I possibly can? Am I setting my workers up for success? And so that takes work because it's not something that comes natural to organizations, but it pays huge dividends. And finally, what you find is a very important part of great safety cultures is continual improvement, continual improvement. If you look at the safety management system requirements of the gas industry, API 1173, one of the elements of API 1173 is continual improvement. So I use this example. Let's say you're very happy with your culture and your operation within your organization. You've got great metrics around leading indicators. It's producing great results on the lagging side, but you have about 5% employee turnover. Some companies have 10% employee turnover. So that means every 4 years, between 20 and 40% of the people in the organization are going to be brand new. They need to be continually bathed in the ways and manner and culture of the way you want things done when it comes from a safety standpoint. That's why you need to continually massage this. It's like the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Things want to go to chaos, and they will go to chaos within the organization, or they will deviate from what your expectations are if you're not continually trying to improve your safety culture and safety conditions. So those are, some key important elements of safety.
Great. Well, now that Nick has defined a safety first culture, we would like to know how you would describe the current state of your culture as it relates to safety. So we will launch our first poll. Give everyone about 20 seconds to choose the option that best describes the current state of their safety culture. Okay. Thank you everyone for voting. Nick, here are the results from our first poll. You want to talk through these?
It's great to see that the majority of folks sense that their company is good to excellent. And it's also good to see that a fair number here, about a third of the folks online self-recognize that there is a gap to excellence. There's an opportunity to improve. And so that's healthy and refreshing because things start there. So I would, when I kind of see organizations, I caution folks that think they have it right, and they probably do, but without constant attention, it's easy to slip and fall back. We just talked about that, and it's really I applaud those companies that are able to identify that they have a lot of gaps to excellence, because it really begins with self-acknowledgement that things can improve. So that's really good to hear. So the question we have next is, why a safety first culture? And you might ask, well, what kind of question is that? Of course, everyone wants a safety first culture, but when you think about, a lot of the leaders of our organizations, they didn't grow up through operations and engineering and the field where the high risk activity occurs, either for workers or for something horrific to happen. And so it could be that the leaders our lawyers, our financial people, human resource people, government relations people. And so they have familiarity with safety, and they certainly understand the importance of running a safe operation, but sometimes don't necessarily understand that while they don't have that operational background, they really need to learn about how they need to lead a high hazard organization around a safety first culture. So, the statistic that I share is that we have not improved. Over the last 14 years, research has shown that the fatality rate of workers across the country has maintained stubbornly high. Every 99 minutes, a worker dies here in the United States. And as I mentioned, this is really a 14-year trend. And you think about all the ramp up in the time and effort and energy and money that companies have put into safety, you would think that we would see a different result, but it's not happening. And I think the worst day that you can experience as a leader is when someone on your watch gets seriously injured or is killed. It's an awful experience. It's something that you don't want to have happen. But imagine the families of that person and the traumatic experience that is, and how it leaves those families void of an important and loved member of the family. So it really starts with that. We're not getting any better at this when it comes to these serious injuries and fatalities. So, it starts there. But for those that are more financially oriented, it's good for business. Less injuries means less worker downtime, higher productivity. If you do the work correctly, you do the work most efficiently. If you do the work with people who are trained properly, with the right tools and equipment, that have the right information that they need to perform the job, I can demonstrate to you that the work gets done far more efficiently, far more cost effectively, not just from an injury standpoint, but that all of those things need to line up in order for work to be done safely. So safety and efficiency are synonymous. Let me say that again. Safety and efficiency are synonymous. If you invest the time, effort, energy to make sure the work is done as safe as possible, if you've done your job right, that work is also done as efficient as possible. Clearly, you're going to save on lawyers and insurance premiums and all the fines and penalties that you would get from any of the safety regulators or the state utility regulators and all of that. But I hope I don't have to convince anybody on this call that safety is good business. But the key point I want you to make, especially to the financially minded people in the organization, that there's data out there that you can empirically demonstrate to those financially minded people that safety is great for the bottom line. Okay. All right. What are the steps to a safety first culture? It really starts with one simple premise: value life above all else. Value life above all else. If you can start the day there, and that's ingrained as your number one objective, the probability of you making the best decisions in guiding your organization to achieve the best safety results possible have gone up dramatically. It's great that we track and address slips, trips, and falls, but as I mentioned earlier, especially in our industry and other high hazard industries, if the work isn't done correctly, especially certain types of the work that we do, whether it be at height, in confined space, with special equipment, lifting, dealing with energized electric or gas facilities, making an error, doing something wrong, can lead to a horrific catastrophe, hurting or killing your workers or members of the public. So your focus should be on serious injuries and fatalities. And we need to use all the systems and information available to us to ensure that we achieve the safety results that we expect. Minimal compliance with legal requirements is not enough. That's just the ante in the game of safety. Now, for those who are not familiar, federal regulations, state regulations are a game of compromise. People propose regulations, then the lobbyists begin, then the horse trading begins, and then things get watered down to what everyone can minimally accept. But that is simply just not enough. Those are the minimal expectations that any company should strive for. Those are the things that if you do those things, it probably keeps you out of jail, but it doesn't mean you're safe. And so everyone should ask themselves, what is the situation in my company? What are the risks that we face? What are the things that we need to do to mitigate those risks? If you have a brand new system that has been built to the latest and greatest safety standards and equipment standards, what you do to maintain and monitor that system may be very different than a system that was installed 80 years ago, dealing with aging equipment that you're keeping together with duct tape and baling wire, right? And so those minimal requirements may, I doubt, work for something that might be brand new in today's standards, but it's certainly not going to be good enough for the situation that I described. So value life above all else. Okay. What's next? So many times I see companies be reactive. They have an incident, then people want to do something. And they want to do something from their perspective, from their lens. And it all comes from a great place, right? They want to ensure that they can address the issue that happened and identified. But too often, we don't listen enough. My mother used to coach me all the time that God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I should use them in that proportion. I don't always listen to that advice. I should, but when it comes to safety, it's a critically important piece of advice. And those ears should be focused on the people that do the work. When I first went to PG&E after San Bruno, so San Bruno happened in September of 2010, and I took over the gas operations of PG&E in June of 11. The first week, I went to the Union Hall in Vacaville, California. It's the largest IBEW local in the country. Went there by myself, had my jeans on, no PowerPoint, no nothing. I had a yellow pad and a pen. And I sat there for 3 hours and listened to the union leaders, and they were a wealth of information. About every half hour, I had to remind them that, I wasn't here, so because it certainly felt like an ass kicking, but that's okay. But I learned so much. And every 3 or 4 months for the next 7 years, I would go back to the union hall and do the exact same thing. And I would learn so much. And my team, my leadership team and I, we made it our business to constantly be out in the field, constantly looking to workers, making them part of the process to help us improve worker safety, and also helping us identify the risks within our gas operation and close the gaps on those risks. And so I can't emphasize enough how critically important it is to talk with the folks that actually do the work. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Workers must feel comfortable to speak up about safety issues. Even equally importantly, it needs to be easy for a worker to report issues or problems. They have to feel like they're being listened to. I like to say that it's critically important to ask people to speak up, and they will do that when you ask them, but they will only do it if they think that you're listening up. So speak up and listen up only work when they happen together. But then the most critical component is follow up. If you ask people for their advice and their opinion, you listen to it, but you don't do anything with it, are they going to bother to tell you anything in the future? Now, you don't have to agree with everything. Matter of fact, you're going to get a lot of criticism that might be unfair. But you also will get amazing nuggets of gems and jewels around safety that you never would have been able to glean on your own. So you may have to put up with some noise, but it's well worth it. So please remember those 3 things. Ask your people to speak up. Make sure that you and your fellow leaders listen up. Critical to follow up. And you know what? If you make a mistake and you don't follow through, just say, I'm sorry. Here's what happened. Be humble. Don't make up bedtime stories. They can smell it a mile away. Be humble and say, I'm sorry, I'll get to it, and here's my revised time schedule. You will gather their respect. They don't want to see ego, they want to see action. They don't want to hear words, they want to see things happen. Right? You're not going to get judged by what you say, you're going to get judged by what you do. So,
before Nick jumps into the 4th step to create a safety-first culture, we would like to ask you our second poll question, and that is, how do you currently identify safety threats at your company? The poll is launching now, so please select your answer. We'll give you about 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, thank you. And Nick, it looks like most of our audience members are using verbal or written reports, and they're also using safety audits. We have just one person who's using software. Are you surprised by those results?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I would have thought there would have been more use of software on smart devices. Uh, One of the things that we deployed when I was at PG&E several years back, probably about 5 years ago, was something that we call CAP app. So it was an app for the corrective action program that we stole shamelessly from our nuclear power plant. They didn't have it on an app, but they had a whole system. But at PG&E, every worker has CAP app. Every contractor has access to it. You can take a picture of it. It's date and time stamped. The information gets fed into the corrective action system. It gets risk ranked on a daily basis. It gets assigned a corrective action owner. The person that submitted the report gets to track the progress against the identified problem and receives a report when the item is closed out, and they can do a Yelp-like feature where they can rank the quality of the closeout process, and so you get a 5-star system. So it's very important to make it, as I mentioned earlier, to make it easy for your folks to report. They don't want to fill out a lot of paperwork. They're out in the field. They want an easy way to be able to do that. The easier you can make it for them, the richer source of information that you will receive. And the more information you receive by the data points out on the field, you can begin to use things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify potential problems before they happen. And it not only is a way of efficiently gathering information, but if you can get it in a standardized digital format, it will create a wealth, a treasure trove of information that can be tapped to do predictive analysis and create leading indicators for you to identify your highest area of risk before things actually happen.
Right, absolutely. Those leading indicators instead of the lagging indicators. Right.
Yep.
Well, let's jump back into the presentation. And you did talk about this a little bit when you're talking about number 3. But let's talk a little bit more about listening to issues and following through on promises.
Yeah, I think I beat this one pretty good, and it's just so important. I find that the servant leader model works great when you're dealing with high hazard industries. The people that actually do the work have so much technical knowledge, and when you think about it, the safe performance of the critical equipment that we have on our networks completely is dependent upon the hands of the last people that touches that piece of equipment. It relies on their skill, their craftsmanship, their ability to do the work effectively. Were they trained correctly? Do they have the right tools? Were they given enough time? Were they given enough? Were they given enough time in advance to know what they were going to be asked to do, so they could properly prepare? Which we find is a critical aspect to making sure that work gets done safely. The more things get rushed, the more they're last minute, the higher risks are associated with that. So it just goes to this notion of being great listeners and having what we like to call a say to do ratio equal to 1. If you're going to say you're going to do something, you have to do it. And if you don't do it, like I said, go back, apologize, be humble, don't make excuses. but you will be judged on your do-say ratio. And that one thing is a tremendous leading indicator to the culture that will be developed in your organization. The higher do-say ratio you have, the better open and transparent and responsive culture you will have. The lower do-say ratio, you will not get the feedback you need in the way you need it, in the time frame that you need it. And finally, you need that information from the people that do the work to properly prioritize the limited resources that every single company in the world faces. Every company has a line that they draw every year, right? And so those resources are, in the short run, limited. And so you want to make sure that you get your biggest bang for the buck for whatever you do regarding the deployment of those resources, whether it be the time of your people or whatever you're procuring through your supply chain. So the more information, actionable information that you receive, the better you will be able to allocate those resources effectively. And finally, I think that it's important that we learn from mistakes. It's important that we have a deep understanding of failures that occur and successes. Why did something go right? If you look at something when it goes wrong, and that's great, and you need to do a important root cause analysis, you can't accept simplistic explanations. You can't accept that the worker didn't follow procedure or they used the wrong piece of equipment. You need to understand why. You know, you are all probably familiar with the 5 whys. I see a lot of companies talk about the 5 whys, but they don't implement the 5 whys. They don't do the 5 whys. And when something does happen and it goes wrong, especially something that we do on a fairly regular basis, I see that companies just look at the failure. Well, you can also learn as much, if not more, about when you did that task before, why did it go right so often? And compare the two. And that helps inform as well. We need to look at not only incidents at our own companies, but also look at other companies within our industry and other companies who do similar types of work in other industries. There's a tremendous amount to be learned from others in this space, especially when you really peel back the onion and understand why something occurred. And you know what's great about our industry, because the electric and gas companies don't directly compete with each other so much, that it's important that we share as much as humanly possible when serious incidents do occur, so that others can learn from our mistakes and we can learn from the mistakes of others. And so being able to share those experiences freely and learn from them is an essential feature of a great safety culture company.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Now, before we open the floor to any questions that the audience has, we actually have one last poll question for you. I'll go ahead and launch that now. We just want to know which of the topics that you see on your screen you're most interested in learning a little bit more about. And thank you to everyone who submitted answers to that poll. So this brings us to the Q&A portion of our webinar. So thank you to the few folks who have submitted questions during Nick's presentation. If you have not asked your question yet, you can do so using the Q&A feature of our software. Nick, we did get a few questions in here already. So first, I would like to ask, or an attendee would like to ask, I should say, if the absence of an incident doesn't mean an organization is safe, does the presence of an incident mean an organization is unsafe?
That's a great question. Well, I think when a serious incident does happen, I think that's the best evidence that you have that an organization has issues. How broad those issues are, how big those gaps are, how far they go, I think needs to be determined through a causal analysis. But if a serious incident happens, I think it's pretty fair to say that that there's a significant issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay. We have a question from Dan in the audience. He would like to know, have we overly focused on the safety pyramid that suggests if we tend to have similar issues, we can avoid or reduce probability of the quote big one? Therefore, we tend to focus on PPE and proper footwear, etc., rather than a risk-based approach.
Yes, I think Dan said that more eloquently than I did in his question. I think through the pyramid approach, we saw over time that only took us so far from a safety perspective, and then we got stuck. And we're still having these serious injuries and fatalities. We reduced the number of overall slips, trips, falls, things like that, but it's so much easier for an organization to focus on those things because they're more easily measurable. They happen in larger numbers. People can do some statistical analysis, but I find that the risk-based approach is certainly the way to go. If you think about electric and gas work, you think about the type of work that we do every day, there's probably 10 to 15 discrete types of activities that have the highest risk, the highest probability that if something doesn't go right, there's going to be a serious injury or fatality that will occur. And I think those companies that still make sure that they're following all the appropriate safety protocols around footwear and eyewear and PPE and all that sort of stuff, but shift 80% of their safety focused work around those risk-based activities and have lots of eyes and thinking on those activities, they see the best results when it comes to reducing serious injuries and fatalities.
We have an incredibly timely question that just came in about the blackouts that happened throughout Texas and the South. And the question is this: we all saw the blackouts in Texas and the problems they caused. How do you think about utility disaster recovery work in terms of worker safety risk?
I think it's very important that this is where you have an opportunity to shine. You have to have your safety standards in place, and you can't compromise them, because if you're serious about safety being the most important thing, that you value life above all else, you have to maintain those standards. Now, there are interim controls you can put in place that you may not have in place during the normal time. So you may deploy more safety advisors to the field than you would ordinarily. You may ask people to work a little more out of sort of the normal range, but you can put in place things that where workers can raise their hand and say, you know what, I just can't do it. I'm fatigued, I'm tired, or whatever. I remember when I was back at National Grid, we had a horrific ice storm that came across eastern New York and northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. And Chris Root was our incident commander. And I remember we had previously had asked for all sorts of help from utility companies across eastern Canada and the eastern United States. And there were veg management crews that came in, and there were a couple of crews that came in from one contractor that did not have the appropriate PPE. They were observed in the field of not following standards according to our own standards, and Chris immediately removed them and took them off the project and sent them back home, knowing that he was going to lose two important veg management crews that he needed in his restoration process. But he didn't compromise at all, and he really set the message went out to all the workers that he cared about them. And then he was going to do everything he possibly could to ensure their safety.
That's a great personal example. We have a question here about incident avoidance. So can you share your perspective on the belief that all events or incidents are avoidable? Are there any liabilities holding this belief?
Yeah, I start from the premise that all serious injuries and fatalities are avoidable. I have to start there. It's sort of my core. Then people give me, well, how can you prevent an injury when the United Airlines plane's engine fell on Denver and would have hit somebody? And it's like, come on, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the work that we're responsible for. We are responsible for transporting electricity and gas, which, if not done correctly, can lead to serious injuries or fatalities of not just our employees, but the public at large. And the public expects us not to have a serious incident that could somehow seriously injure or kill them, right? I mean, if you would ask any member of the public, they would tell you that that's our job. And they don't know anything about electricity or gas. And that's our obligation to ensure that happens. And I think that's the right place to start. And I think the focus on the highest risk type of work that we do, and it goes way back, right? It's like HR is involved. Do we hire the right people in the beginning? Are they physically qualified to do the work? Do they have the mental capacity to deal with the complexity of the type of work that we do in today's environment? Do we properly provide them with the right training, the right experiences? Do we give them the right tools and equipment? Do we set them up for success by making sure that they know what work they're going to do in advance so they can properly prepare that work? And also to help managers make sure that they're assigning the right crews with the right capabilities to the right work, right? So it goes way back and all the way through. And every person in the organization has some responsibility around the safety performance of the organization.
Great. I want to thank everyone who's been asking questions. We have time for just one more, so I will take this one from Brian. And this is about one of the elements of a safety first culture that you spoke about earlier in the presentation, Nick, and that is this. My experience has shown me that there is sometimes a lot of work to be done between the top-down leading of a safety culture. I find that in many cases, it takes leadership development to create leaders at every level to lead safety. While many are good managers of work groups or people, not all possess the necessary skills to be safety leaders. Do you agree?
I agree. It's to change culture at all with an organization, it's extraordinarily difficult and time consuming. And so I urge people to focus on behaviors. Um, it's easier to change behaviors than it is the culture. And even within large companies, there is no one culture. The culture in the northern division is going to be different from the southern division. The culture in the finance function is going to be different from the other aspects of the organization. But behaviors are something that you can influence more quickly. I'll give you an example. When I went to PG&E, one of the things that they told me was that we had a very entitled workforce. That not only do they work there, but their aunt or uncle or father or mother may have worked there, their grandmother may have worked there, and the workforce felt like we owe them something. But when I looked at it, I saw an incredibly loyal workforce that loved the company and wanted to do good. Yep, they had expectations around other things as well, but what company wouldn't give their right arm for a workforce that loved their company and was so loyal? But what I focused on was not that aspect of the culture. That was what it was. I could be there for 20 years. I'm not going to change that, right? That's embedded into that family-oriented culture. But the problem I had was that it was an anti-speak up culture. It was a fear culture. People would not report anything because if they did, they were beat over the head like clubbing a baby seal, right? And so what I did was say, we're getting rid of that. And we're putting in a non-punitive self-reporting culture. So in a very short period of time, we went from like having nothing reported up in the organization to an avalanche of issues that the workforce was identifying. That's a behavior. And so I urge you to think about what are the behaviors that you need to see and how are you going to lead and drive those behaviors. But none of that is easy. It is 724 leadership. And I'll close with this. Remember what I said about the second law of thermodynamics and entropy, right? You need to constantly keep this organization, this living, breathing organization that you have from deviating and going off course, because that's what nature wants it to do, right? Nature wants everything to eventually go to chaos. And so organizations are no different. It needs leadership, it needs guidance, it needs focus, it needs hands-on. And then it's so rewarding to see how you're able to shift large workforces in a direction. If they see you investing your heart and soul, they'll follow. Lisa,
Right.
thank you for the opportunity to speak with our folks today. I really appreciate the invite, and to all our folks on our discussion today, thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any emails, questions after the fact. You can get that from Lisa, and she'll be happy to share that information with you. And if I can ever be of help to any of you, please let me know. Safety is my passion.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. That concludes our webinar today. So on behalf of everyone at Urbint, I want to thank you all for attending and participating in our polls. And I would especially like to thank Nick for his expert insight into this topic. We'll see you again soon.